We will hear argument this morning in case 2512.
Grievances we could go into with this system. I think we could be here for hours.
National Collegiate Athletic Association.
I think we have some proof, even a few years into NIL now, that people care about the logo.
There are too many people in power who have no desire to give up that power.
The NCAA's ever-shifting decisions, not stable decisions.
Does the concept of amateurism in college athletics even matter anymore?
They've capped it again without any sort of collective bargaining.
We'll finish with our unilateral decision.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unilateral Decisions. We are once again away from the office, but we are here to talk a very current issue. Jayden Daniels, his attorney, has written a cease and desist letter to his alma mater, former school, LSU, and their athletic director, saying they were only allowed to use his name, image, and likeness for 180 days after his last collegiate contest. So, I want to go back. Joe, Mike, you're both individuals who have utilized legacy players in marketing and branding components. So what is the value to a university of utilizing former players in your modern day marketing and branding?
Recruiting. I mean, you're trying to showcase who's come through your program, who you developed, who you put into the league, and constantly and consistently remind everybody that whoever it was that you're putting out there, you know, made it because he was at your institution.
I think the value component, you know, is to Joe's point, there certainly is that. I think this gets into a really, really interesting conversation about what is commercial use, what is editorial use, what is fair use. And it's also a new, you know, kind of a new situation here. And then we'll talk about obviously the past and things that happened, you know, pre-NIL and things like that, when the scholarship agreement said certain things. But this is one of those, maybe, you know, we keep coming back to this term of unintended consequences, but this is one of those things of like, you're not paying the players to play. You're paying them for their NIL, and that can come with strings. And so I think it does come back to the fair use component, the editorial, commercial, all of those things. And, you know, the ability to state a fact that somebody played for you so many years ago and they were the number one overall pick. I think there's a very healthy, you know, defense of that. But utilizing that next to commercial rights, next to sponsorable elements, next to other things, yeah, you that's not yours. The more this becomes commercial, the more, you know, that is not yours, and that is somebody else's right, and you're going to have a conversation about that.
Sam, this is not the first case of athletes complaining about former teams utilizing their name, image, likeness. So historically, how often have these athletes complained, and then litigation been brought in, not only at the college level, but the professional level as well?
Yeah, I mean, when we first saw the cease-and-desist from Jayden Daniels, I think a lot of us, including me, kind of laughed it off a little bit because it's so kind of petty. It's tied to his uniform number and all that. But the complaint about the use of his NIL and the wanting restrictions on the use of his NIL, that's not a new thing at all. I mean, we go back to the O'Bannon decision, back in 2014, 2015. That kind of kicked off this entire wave of litigation that led to Alston, led to House. That was about fundamentally the same thing. That, you know, of course, I think we all know the story at this point. You know, Ed O'Bannon was watching, I think it was his nephew playing the NCAA basketball video game, and saw that he was in it, and like, wait, I'm not supposed to be in that. I never got informed about this. I never got paid for it. And we see similar lawsuits. We've seen similar lawsuits ever since. I mean, House, of course, you know, we think about it as kind of this very broad revenue sharing type things, but the central complaints in House were, one, restrictions on NIL, which of course, you know, July 1st, 2021 got kind of eliminated. But the second part was broadcast NIL, the inability to negotiate terms for the use of an athlete's broadcast NIL. And that even goes back to, the mid 2000s. There's a lawsuit against ESPN over broadcast NIL as well. And even in kind of the post-House era, we've seen lawsuits by, Mario Chambers, Denard Robinson, Reggie Bush. More recently, we're currently seeing a couple lawsuits by Jameson Williams and Ezekiel Elliott. And they're all claiming very kind of similar things, even if the legal theories are or the legal theories aren't necessarily different, but definitely the defenses are different. They're all claiming that, these universities, these conferences, the NCAA at large they're continuing to use, these players' NIL without their consent and for commercial purposes. And that gets really kind of tricky and really kind of hairy, and one that, I think, Mike and Joe have already kind of expressed how, the virtue of it, and kind of the, the same kind, but also at the same kind of the weird line that you're kind of going between, really just kind of archiving a legacy and using it for commercial value.
The broadcast side is fascinating to me. It opens up such a bag of worms, right? Because you think of historical moments that are relevant every year. I go back to the 1992 Christian Laettner buzzer beater that gets played every March on CBS when they're talking about buzzer beaters, clutch moments in the NCAA tournament. So how much should a broadcast partner like a CBS, ESPN, et cetera, be worried about the ability to use historical highlights with, I don't know if we'd call these frivolous lawsuits, but how much worry would you have if you're an ESPN when talking about historical highlights of players when they were in college?
I'm definitely a little wary if I'm in that position, because it is such an issue that really just hasn't been litigated fully. We had, the Marshall decision that I mentioned before back in the Sixth Circuit back in 2008 that ruled that broadcast NIL isn't a thing. Players don't have the right to, or don't have a right of publicity right to kind of the name, image, and likeness in broadcast. But that was pre, a lot of the litigation that's kind of happened, kind of based in large part, even if not explicitly, on kind of the old Board of Regents language, talking about ample latitude for amateurism. And in fact, since then, and after Alston, I should say, in fact, days after Alston, I think it was like 3 days after Alston that this decision came out, and our House v. NCAA, Judge Claudia Wilken ruled against the motion to dismiss. She denied a motion dismissed by the NCAA, and the NCAA explicitly argued, hey, based on this Marshall decision, these athletes don't have a property right to their to broadcast NIL. And Judge Wilken said, well, I'm not so sure about that. It's something that needs to be litigated further. And, obviously it never was. We had the House settlement, but it is something where it's kind of this weird looming kind of issue that's never been litigated fully. The House settlement is very clear that it does not decide the issue at all, and one that we could see potentially in one of these claims moving forward.
Joe,
I think it'd be really interesting to see where.
Go for it,
sorry
Mike.
about that, Tom. I think it'll be really interesting to see where, like, we were talking about this before we jumped on, but the rights holder in most cases is the conference, who is, granted the right to ESPN for the broadcast, the original production of the game that was going on. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how hard anybody wants to fight what. And, like, obviously ESPN and the likes would feel very strongly that they have every right to reutilize their original broadcast. And especially, I go back to the editorial commercial comment, like, there's a lot of instances that you would bring up that's like, we're just documenting what's happening, right? Like, that is all that this is. And that makes a ton of sense. Very strong argument. Is a conference going to then, they may be put in a really hard spot to say, we want to avoid litigation. Like, these things aren't that valuable to us as a league, as a conference, to have this historical stuff outside of, maybe there's specific things. Like, if they had to say, yeah, we don't really care if, Ezekiel Elliott's stuff is shared publicly, so be it. But they're going to be right back to the multimedia rights partners that they work with all the time, saying, whoa, you got to stand up for us now. Like, you can't be pulling that rug out from under us. And so there is kind of this, like, push and pull, rock in a hard place that could happen that may put conferences in a really, really uncomfortable spot, having to stand up against these former athletes when they maybe don't feel all that strongly about a specific case, but the consequences of, pissing off the other side of the equation is pretty substantial.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, these TV networks paid a ton of money to these conferences for these rights, And to your point, I mean, this is what's happening. We're the ones that we paid to be the ones that are bringing you this content. And then, I mean, go beyond ESPN, Fox, CBS. I mean, what about all these local stations that are shooting the games from the sidelines? I mean, are they no longer able to show any of this because they're just documenting what's happening too? And that's fair use. That's editorial content. That's all these things. But I mean, the student athletes are asking the right questions in this case. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but did the conference have the right to grant this on their behalf to ESPN for forever in perpetuity? And that seems like, at least in not the Daniels case, but in some of these other ones, that seems to be at least one of the questions that's being asked.
Well, and one of the really interesting pieces that I want to hear from Sam on is like they did have the right, but those contracts have since been challenged so much. What does that look like? Like, what is we talk about statute of limitations, we talk about like all these other things, but like what does that really look like? Who has a case here when the agreements that said you get a scholarship which allows us to do X, Y, and Z? In fact, what it said was no one can use your NIL except us, is really what those agreements said, which is how we got here. So that was the agreement in place. They were able to do it at the time. They felt really strongly about that. Those have since been challenged. Where does that leave us?
Yeah, and Joe, you were saying you're not a lawyer, and Mike, you're not either. But you guys are hitting on the exact issues. I must be rubbing off on you because, you brought up newscasting. You brought up, they're just showing what's happening. That's exactly the legal defense here. That's exactly kind of the counter argument to these claims. I mean, when you think about NIL, it's kind of difficult to kind of imagine this because NIL has become such a loaded word in 2026, but NIL is really just right-of-publicity, which is a very common intellectual property right. It's an intellectual property right that's been around since the 50s and one that's been very heavily litigated, and always the other side of the equation, really for any intellectual property claim, but especially for right-of-publicity, is the First Amendment. Where are you, are you just commenting on it? Is it fair use? Or is it something where you're actually, looking to get commercial value out of what you're doing? I mean, you think about, one of the classic cases to this end was the one involving Michael Jordan, where he had Jewel Osco, a supermarket in Chicago, put an ad in the paper congratulating him for making the Hall of Fame, which, you kind of think, okay, well, that's just commenting on a current event. The court said, no, you included a coupon with it. Like, that is commercializing. That is, putting a commercial value on this multi-million-dollar, athlete, brand. And, to kind of the same end, we've already seen that because, I talked about the O'Bannon case, but even before O'Bannon, kind of part of that trilogy challenging the EA Sports video games was Hart and Keller, which were two cases, 2013, 2014, that challenged it based on right-of-publicity. One in the Ninth Circuit, one in the Third Circuit, and both times the defense from EA and from the NCAA was the First Amendment, was we have a right to, use these players' likenesses to, kind of create this artistic expression. Not quite the news one, but, this artistic expression, and both times the court shot it down. The question is, where on the spectrum does it actually fall? Like, does it fall... because I think it's, the video games are very far on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's something that's so clearly commercial use, but it's not quite using the logo or using the player's face on ESPN, during SportsCenter, because that's purely telling the news. Like, it's kind of something in the middle because you are presenting this broadcast. You're, as Joey, as you pointed out, you're paying millions, billions of dollars to have the rights to these broadcasts, and clearly you're selling it as a commercial product. So it gets really, really tricky. It just, the question that hasn't been answered, do the athletes actually have a property right in that kind of NIL?
Let's go back to just the branding around these facilities. Simplify it. Let's say someone like Jayden Daniels comes in, says you can no longer use my NIL for anything. For Joe and Mike, I know Sam is fortunate to have never worked in an athletic department, but for those of you that have, take me back to your football, basketball facilities. What percentage of the photo usage in those areas are legacy athletes, and what do you think the estimated cost would be to update those on a yearly basis to active players only?
I mean, Mike, you want to go or you want me to go?
Yeah, no, I'll go first. I mean, the vast majority are former players, and that's just how it makes sense, right? I mean, like, not only from a cost to replace, but like, you just never know, and you really don't want to be in a situation where you're having to take somebody's thing down mid-season because who knows what happened, and so you're always a little safer with like someone whose career is over. That's just the reality. Like, there are exceptions to the rule, captains, things like that. But by and large, we're talking former athletes, and you frame it in a way that you're, celebrating the past and the legacies and all of that. I think that there's a huge cost to replacing that on a consistent basis. That's a really big cost to do it well. I think that there's a couple different ways to go about it. Like, if you're doing it for like the novelty of it and being able to put somebody up in a building and you want to bring them in and surprise them and show them, like, that's kind of cool. But like, if you lose that because you have to tell someone that you're doing it and, kind of seek their permission, I don't know that like that's really a huge barrier. And I think a lot of athletes would grant that type of permission. But, I think that's the world we live in now. They're like, you've either got to ask that question, or you have to have it spelled out in the contract beforehand. Like, you have to have it in your agreement, your financial aid agreement, your whatever agreement, rev share, whatever we're calling it, that says like, we have these rights. We have these rights to publish photos of you in our facility. You can say non-commercial, like all that stuff can get negotiated, but like, that's the world we live in now. It's got to be contractual. It's got to be in there. And so there's other ways to attack like the guys that were there 20, 30 years ago. And, you can have that conversation on the front end to avoid some of these things down the road, which make a ton of sense. But I mean, that's just the truth of where we are right now.
Yeah, Mike, and on that point, I realized I never answered your question about, the contracts where they signed away, they said, only we can use your NIL kind of moving forward. And you're absolutely right. Those have been challenged from here to Kingdom Come. They've been challenged as anti-competitive, as violating antitrust law, our favorite two words on this podcast. And it makes sense, and it's something where I think the NCAA is kind of, and the CLC and the conferences have kind of given up on really trying to kind of enforce them, because they know that courts are just going to look at them and say, okay, well, these contracts were created in an incredibly anti-competitive environment where, these athletes did not have a choice. It's not like they can negotiate the terms of it. They can go to another school. They can go to another school that wouldn't do it because it was required across the entire NCAA. So just one of those things were kind of similar to every other amateurism restriction that's kind of been shut down over the past few years. That would not hold up in court, though. I think it does depend on the judge and kind of their perception of, well, you signed a contract, so that contract's going to stand. It really just doesn't happen.
99%, 99.9% of people that are going to be immortalized on a wall in their athletic facility are going to feel honored, and they're going to appreciate it. But to Mike's point about this new era of college athletics, it probably behooves athletic departments to have something in place that grants them that right moving forward, because by signing this agreement and being a part of this program, you are a part of our history. Yes, it's your individual history as well, but that history came to fruition as part of this program.
So we've mentioned contracts. Mike, you've been a part of many a contract when it comes to the NIL world. When you work your day job and you're working with trading cards, collectibles, what sort of timeline is factored into those contractual agreements to where you can use those photos and those players?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge part of the business. There's a very rigid understanding of what somebody's value is at different junctures of their career, and obviously they're not going to try to assume before a certain point in time that what value they wouldn't have. So very generally, it's going to, our rights to utilize an athlete at On It are going to end with their collegiate eligibility being exhausted through whichever form that is, whether they graduate, whether they finish playing their last game. you run into a lot of different technicalities where like a player, you may be past graduation, but a baseball or softball season is still going on and they're still playing. And so when you're truly finding like what is your sell-off period, because that's what happens for us in our world, is we hit a date of no return, and then you have a sell-off period where you're allowed to still liquidate the product and inventory that you have. And so we run into these situations where when we produce team-specific full team products that are group licensing driven, and you have individual athletes negotiating and redlining their contracts to say, your rights to me end the day that I declare for the draft, or the last day that I play a game, or the day that I graduate. We have a standard we try to keep, but there's certain athletes that, if they redline it, like it's not gonna be a non-negotiable for us. We want to work with that athlete. And so it does make it difficult to really kind of keep track of what does this look like. For instance, we had a football program that we had to stop selling that program before we stopped selling anybody else because the athlete who was on the box art had a different agreement than anybody else in our whole lineup. And it was an earlier termination date. The sell-off period was 45 days instead of 90 days. So there's a lot that does go into it. And a lot of it is to protect the athletes, but also, I think we could get into a much longer conversation on some other licensees in the space, but they have rights too, right? And so a lot of it is protect, like in football, the NFLPA. When you become a member of the NFLPA, when you become an NFL caliber athlete, and there's this period in the NFL where in between you playing your last college game and you actually signing your agreement to be like signing your pro contract, there's this period where you have like the most market value because you are not part of this group licensing, and you're free to go sign signatures with all these different companies, and they're allowed to make cards of you. And so it's this kind of weird rat race that we on the college side, they want to make sure they're maximizing that time. They don't want to be under agreement during the combine when we could just be making more cards of them, and it dilutes the value that they have on the market. And then they certainly a lot of times don't want us to be able to promote and push cards around the draft when they want to go get the biggest exclusive deal that they can get after the biggest moment of their career. Because from a trading card standpoint, rookie cards are the card, right? Like that's what everybody wants. And so your value is the highest at that point. But the NFLPA has exclusive group licensing rights at that point. And there's a bunch of litigation around Leaf and Wildcard and some of these other companies right now where when there are more than 6 pro athletes, even if these companies have an agreement with six, 7 individual athletes, if they're using all of them in a product, even if they're on individual agreements, that is violating the NFLPA's use of group rights because there are too many athletes included that fit within the current group of current NFLPA athletes. And so that's a whole thing that we have to worry about on the backside. It's not even our intention, but if we continue selling, let's say Indiana football had 8 guys drafted last year, and we keep selling a product that has all 8 of them in it, we're now in violation of the NFLPA rights because we have a product with a group of their players, even though that nothing to do with the intent. But I mean, that's why I kind of laugh at like the naivety of some of this on the college side, because like it exists everywhere. Like we all have to deal with it. Everyone deals with it, and it's very real. But the colleges are so new to it, and so many people are going exacerbated, like, oh my gosh, that's something. Like, yeah, it is something. And like these things happen, these deadlines happen, these timelines happen where the commercial rights to somebody expires unless you've put it in a contract, and you could still lose that battle because somebody else might have a contract that supersedes you.
So I will go on record as saying no one is trying to sell my jersey. No one is trying to put me on billboards. So I understand the hypocrisy in me drawing some negative attention to things that are not my life's problem. But I do find a part of this Jayden Daniels story to be fascinating. In a release, they say the Daniels family is deeply disappointed and feels profoundly disrespected by LSU's decision to give Jayden's number to another player. That leads into a different discussion on how LSU and other schools do it. LSU, there's a distinction between retired jerseys and retired numbers. There's a whole thing that's not really worth getting into. But as far as our show's concerned, Sam, Mike, Joe, do you believe a part of these new recruiting pitches might include a jersey retirement clause where if you reach certain markers of success, no one gets to utilize that number anymore. And is that something that we could see?
Might run out of jersey numbers.
Thank you.
I mean,
Not until we're putting 3 digits on a jersey.
yeah,
That's all I can say.
Anything's possible, but I mean, the guy won a Heisman Trophy, and it's been sitting there, unused, since then. So I think the foregone conclusion was that it was going to be retired. I said it to you guys before, but I mean, I hope LSU's excited about this kid, this sophomore corner, because if he wasn't any good, we wouldn't be talking about this right now.
Retiring numbers in football is so hard.
Yeah, from a legal perspective,
it's so hard.
Em, is there any validity to a public questioning of this? If there was any sort of verbal agreement that the uniform would never be used again?
If there's a verbal agreement, that's one thing, because it's a contractual commitment. I mean, contracts can be so broad in terms of what exactly constitutes consideration in order to make an enforceable contract. Saying we're not going to enforce her, it's something where you'd have to have something on both sides of it, where he'd have to give up something to be able to do it. Contracts are unilateral contracts, as much as we love the unilateral decisions on here. Unilateral contracts are not enforceable in court. So, I shouldn't say unilateral contracts. That's a different kind of term in art. Gratuitous contracts. That's what I meant. Contracts that, are really just kind of a gift, as saying, we're going to do this and you don't have to give us anything in return. That's not enforceable in court. You have to have something on both sides of the contract. But yeah, I mean, if it is something where they did have something in the contract, that's potentially something. But I also think it would be kind of interesting to a certain extent. I don't think it would be like, I'm gonna give a strong disclaimer here that I don't think it would be a legitimate lawsuit, but it would be an interesting lawsuit if, and this is not exactly what's going on with Daniels. He's not filing a lawsuit based on the idea that his right of publicity rights are getting violated by someone else using his number, but right of publicity is really broad. Like the idea of, of something kind of constituting a right of publicity, it really is very flexible. When I teach right of publicity in my business law classes at Boise State, I love using a case where, probably one of my favorite cases, just in terms of the fact pattern. There's a portable toilet company called Here's Johnny Portable Toilets, and well, you can probably imagine who they got sued by, and if not, ask your parents. It's one of those things where, and of course, Johnny Carson did win that lawsuit, because it's just one of those things where, if it's something that's associated with you, if it's something where it's reasonably attributable to you individually and not kind of a broader thing, then yeah, like it is an interesting kind of legal question where if you look at a Patriots jersey with number 12 on it, do you immediately think Tom Brady and not think of anyone else? It's something where it's that closely associated with one particular player. I don't know if Jayden Daniels kind of falls into that with, LSU's number 5. He was only there for a year, if I recall. But it is kind of an interesting legal question about whether a jersey number associated with, the particular colors of a school can constitute someone's, right of, actually enforceable right of publicity. Though I don't think we're going to see it in this particular instance.
But isn't this just a cease and desist? This is just like, hey, stop using me in your stuff. Like it has nothing to do with the number 5 and his NIL. It's just, hey, stop using me in your stuff.
Oh yeah, no. I should have been clear if I wasn't. I'm not saying that this is the lawsuit at all. This is not something that is a lawsuit at all. I just was kind of just spitballing, about like, I wonder if he could file that lawsuit. I mean, he probably couldn't, but I wonder if someone else could. If it's something where, they gave the jersey number to someone else for if the Patriots gave 12 to someone else, is that a potential right of publicity claim? But probably not.
I know, as Joe mentioned, this is at this point just a cease and desist. No official litigation has been brought forward, but is there legitimacy to these claims? Do we foresee more and more student athletes suing their former school, and how would those potentially play out in the court of law?
Yeah, I mean, Sam mentioned it earlier. He was talking about commercialization. I mean, I think there's a difference. Take the cease and desist out of it. LSU gets five days from game one, and they post a 5 days from game one graphic, and it's prominently featuring his number 5 in the graphic. I mean, we see these from every program every summer, all summer long, to get people excited about it. And I think LSU has every right to do that. Again, pre-cease and desist, that's a different conversation. But the second you start throwing logos on that, I think there's a conversation to be had. And I think this conversation was being had pre-NIL. I mean, I remember talking to our MMR here, and they wanted to use a photo of a former student athlete and put a sponsorship logo on it. And I told them then, like, you need to go get that guy's permission. Like, you don't have the right to just do that and throw their logo on it. Now, lucky for them, he was here in town. And then on top of that, all he wanted was a bag of cheeseburgers and a case of beer for his fellow GAs. So, I mean, they got out of it, pretty cheaply. But the second you start throwing logos on things and commercializing it, that's where the line gets crossed.
Yeah, or just selling a product with it. Like I remember in the pre-NIL era, the big scandal about, you can go on the NCAA website and all the jerseys that you could find, it was very conspicuous numbers, but there was not any kind of player attached to it. But shockingly, you could search for Johnny Manziel in the search bar, and what do you know? Somehow the number 2 jersey for Texas A&M would pop up. Go figure. I wonder how that happened. Must just be a coincidence, right? That was a big thing. That was a big scandal. That was one of those things that really kind of, when we talk about the snowball effect that kind of led to public reception of public outrage, that kind of led to the NIL era. That was a big part of it. And anything that you're doing, kind of selling a product or putting logos on it. Joe, your example was perfect. The really similar to the example I gave with Jewel Osco and Michael Jordan before. That gets you into trouble. That becomes kind of the legal danger zone. And Dom, as far as your question about whether we're going to see more of these lawsuits happen, I think absolutely. And I think I'm very confident saying that. Well, for one, given that we are certainly in the age of litigation of college sports, very much so. But also we've been seeing it. I mentioned the Mario Chambers lawsuit. I mentioned the Reggie Bush lawsuit, the Denard Robinson lawsuit, and of course, more recently, the Jameson Williams and Zeke Elliott lawsuits. Now, whether there's merit to those lawsuits, I'm not so sure, but are those lawsuits going to happen? Absolutely.
Go for it, Mike. You
the
look like you're about to say
so
something.
Interesting to me. Yeah, it takes me back to 3 years ago or so when, we were having these conversations. This is post NIL, right? So, athletes are able to make compensation and earn money off of this. And we had to have the conversations with anybody who wore jersey number 1, anybody who wore jersey number 23. Like, your stuff is going to be used, and we're going to obscure you. Like, football, it's much easier. You put the visor on it, you do whatever. But this is just part of how things are going to get promoted, and you're not going to make more because of it. Like, your number is not because of you. It's because we're either using number 1, or we're using the year, or we're using whatever. And when Coke wants to put a person, a jersey, literally the jersey of somebody on the stadium cup, and they're using the number 1 to be as innocuous as possible. Yes, that is someone's number, but that is not someone. They're not using that player. And so we had to be very upfront with those conversations about how this is working and why, and kind of to the point of if you don't want this, you can't wear number 1. And so, that's a little bit extreme in this day and age. I don't think that the school would get to have that conversation necessarily and tell an athlete, you don't get to wear that number, but you got to just talk about it up front. You got to have it as part of it. It's part of why the school's paying you. And we're not going to pay you more because you chose to wear number 1 and we granted you number 1 necessarily, or 26 this year. But it's part of what you're getting paid for. This is just part of the deal. That's why you're getting paid rev share. And so, those are some of the things that keep coming up. Do they have legitimate cases? Are we going to start seeing more of this? We talked about statute of limitations. We deserve to see more of it. If in the current climate, these conversations aren't happening on the front end, the schools deserve to have these come at them for sure. There's way too much writing on the wall and way too many ways that you can navigate this now. I feel bad for anybody that's kind of in that like in between. I know the House settlement, settled some of the wrongful use of NIL for athletes of the past, and then but if somebody's caught in the middle there and a school's like, we were just doing our best, like I do feel bad about that. But I agree with Joe wholeheartedly that even before NIL, if you were, you couldn't commercialize the use of a player on a billboard or a phone book or a bobblehead or whatever, if they were still in school, you couldn't allow that to happen. If your answer at the time was, but we can let you use this player that used to be here, and you never had a conversation with that player, tough. Like you deserve to have that come back on you. And that's way before 2021 that was happening. And so there's been a long lead up to this when it comes to former players, how to prepare for that, what conversations to have. And I think that those will continue to happen if people aren't doing it right.
I think you bring up a good point, Mike. I mean, forget the law component to this. What are the ethics and moral high ground involving use of pre-NIL student athletes in your branding?
And well, it's back to the very beginning of this conversation. What is your branding? Is your branding like what we have accomplished as an institution, as a sport program, as whatever? I think that you've got a case. I still think that like you just have to maybe take an extra step. You just got to call the person. You've got to say, we are so grateful to have you as part of the legacy of this program. We want to make sure that we can utilize you moving forward. Like, and there's so many ways to say it. There's so many ways to talk about it. There's so many things that you could like. We talked about this with one program this year that's doing for the trading cards, that's doing a commemorative kind of like, we're recognizing the team coming back on an anniversary kind of thing. And it's like, we don't have the rights. They wanted to see if we could do something that would commemorate that group as part of what they're doing. We don't have the rights to those athletes, but as the institution, if you're hosting any of them, if you're having them do something, if you're paying for their hotel room, for their flight, if you're paying for their tickets, can you write that in? Can you make that be part of what you're doing with them? And there's a way to do all of this. And so I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for somebody that throws their hands up and says like, oh, we didn't know, we were unaware. But yeah, like there's value in it, and those people have a claim to it. So just treat them right, treat people right, and do right by them, and be above board, and you can probably get almost everything you want out of it. Now, I do want to say that Joe's saying like 5 days to kickoff. I would love nothing more than for LSU to put out a graphic with everyone who's worn number 5 for the last 25 years on that graphic and say we're 5 days from kickoff, and really just prove a point that like this isn't about you.
Well, before Mike made that joke,
Not a joke.
which would be funny. There's an easy way. He said it. There's an easy way about this, and I think you could also pose it, to former athletes. If you've got guys in your facility and you never got their permission to put their pictures up, to have a conversation with them and just say, hey, not only do we have you in our facility and we want to make sure you're cool with it, but we also want to make sure that we're protecting the commercialization of your name, image, and likeness from the pre-NIL days. And we want to sign a contract with you that says, A, you're cool with us keeping you in the facility, but B, that we are taking it upon ourselves to ensure that nobody's going to commercialize any of these photos or videos that you've been a part of without your permission, and ensuring that, if they do, that, if you have an interest in getting a cut, that you will. You didn't have this opportunity when you were in college, but we're going to make sure that you have that opportunity moving forward if it comes up.
Joe wants state institutions to sign indemnity clauses. That's hilarious.
Joe,
let's not get into the sovereign immunity here.
We will wrap
That's a whole
up.
other bag.
Before we open up that talking point to Sam, we will wrap up here, give our final thoughts on our unilateral decision of the day. We've kind of talked about it. It's such a fascinating space to be if you're in college athletics, because I go back to the days where coaches would say, you have to earn it. You don't get to be on this wall. You don't get to be in this photo shoot because you haven't earned it. You haven't done the right things. Now, players want to be compensated for being a part of those things, and former players might be upset that they are being utilized without being compensated. So everyone's angry. There's no right answer. But if you're an athletic director for our unilateral decision, how do you approach the usage of legacy players when factoring your marketing, your game presentation, and all your external efforts. Sam, as the lone non-athletics former employee, what is your take on this?
I knew you were going to go to me first because, my answer is probably going to be completely contradicted by Mike and Joe saying, yeah, that's not how it works at all. But, I'll give it my best shot as someone who is very comfortable sitting in the ivory tower. But I think I honestly, and actually maybe this my concern is going to be assuaged by what I'm about to say. I think Mike and Joe have really kind of nailed it with just the idea that you just have the conversation. You just talk to, you talk to the athletes before using it. That you try your best not to commercialize it unless they're getting a cut of it, unless they're cool with it. It's very easy, to. Well, I wouldn't say it's very easy, because it's such a weird line and it's such an unlitigated line between. And I think Darren Heitner, put it best on Twitter this morning when he was talking about the Jayden Daniels thing. When he's talking about what was the difference between kind of highlighting someone's legacy and commercializing them. Kind of saying that, hey, this person was part of our team. This is our history. There's a difference between that and commercializing them. And, even to the 5 days until the first game graphic, there's a big difference between if you just put that on social media, which is the picture of Jayden Daniels on it, and if you put a picture of him or of Jayden Daniels with the 5 days on it and say sponsored by Bojangles. I don't know. I guess that's more Carolinas than Louisiana, but just the first Southern brand I can think of, I guess. But yeah, like there's a big difference there, and I think just being conscientious of the idea that it really just going back to the idea of right-of-publicity in the first place, where everyone has a right to ensure that we're not being seen to endorse products that we're not comfortable endorsing, or we're not being paid to endorse, or anything like that. Like, I wouldn't want someone to go out and sell a line of underwear with my name on it or with my picture on it. Certainly not. Oh, that would be weird. But just kind of that thing at the end of the day, like, just be conscientious of, just really think about, like, is this intended to sell a product? Is this intended to sell something? Or is this intended to highlight our legacy and to kind of give a glimpse of the history and really kind of spotlight someone who was really crucial to us building our legacy, not our brand? If you can distinguish between that.
Joe, let's go to you.
I mean, I'd probably do a couple things. I think I would remind my staff that, if there's going to be a logo on it, then it shouldn't include a former student athlete that you haven't gotten permission from. And if you didn't already have that in place, you've been doing it wrong. That's simple. But I'd also probably touch base, to see if there's anybody that's, disenfranchised with the program. I don't care if it's football, basketball, you pick your sport. If there is somebody that has, accomplished quite a bit, for your sport at your school, I'd probably hold off on using them until things cool down and you can have a conversation with them, because you're stoking a flame and people are already starting to jump on things like this. So I think it might be a cop-out answer. I think that's pretty easy, but if you don't have the conversations, you're letting people just run amok. So those are probably the two conversations I'm having internally.
Yeah, that makes sense. All of those things, everything you guys have already talked about, but I would also take it a step further, and I would, this is one of those things where we talk about these departments becoming businesses, right? And if they want to be treated like it, they better start operating like it. And so I would make sure that anytime, you're just building a database of former athletes that you explicitly have the rights to do these things with. And whether that's because you're bringing somebody back, you're recognizing an anniversary team, you're putting somebody in the Hall of Fame, you're getting rights with that, with doing that. And you're above board with it. You're not trying to squeeze these things in when people aren't looking, but that you have to do it if you want to have these rights and these abilities to go commercialize any of this stuff. And generally, even then, to Sam's point about underwear, like you better include that they have the right to say no to something that's like explicitly commercial. But I think if things, it gets really hard, and I can see how I am sympathetic to like the multimedia rights organization has sold sponsorship around an in-game video component, and it would be kind of tough for the group that is tasked with like creating the component to really know the difference between all these things. That when there's a, you know, Tiger Tails great moments in LSU football history sponsored by Popeyes, and it's a Jayden Daniels highlight clip, like we're kind of in a bit of a quagmire here. And that's not really anyone's fault on the creative side that helped put together the video that goes on the video board, not having to be the one to think about the fact that it's sponsored and this is a person who we no longer have rights to. There's a lot of people that are involved in making these things happen that get handed off from one to the other. That makes it really hard to say everyone's got to be aware of this. So to protect yourself the most possible, that's why I go back to like build your database, build the big group, you know, and hopefully you're doing it moving forward with any athlete that you've got under contract now. But I mean, that's the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to get express permission from anybody that you might be using. And so how do you go get wide swaths of that through recognizing people at different junctures and ensuring that you're able to recognize them in certain fashions, whether that's, you know, in-game features like I talked about, or, you know, simple graphics saying we're this many days away from kickoff and we want to, you know, highlight a historic figure in the program. There's a lot of different kind of steps in there that says like, this is what we get the rights to without really having to ask you again. This is what we get the rights to when we have to come to you and seek permission. And this is what like we won't do unless you are the one coming to us talking about it or whatever. Like, not to get into the weeds on it, but I would try to build that database as fast as possible.
These athletics alumni groups better start having a lot of reunions.
100%.
I tell you what, I know we're 20-some episodes in at this point. We got a few more episodes to go, but as Sam's celebrity takes off, I can't wait to help him come up with the Sam Ehrlich boxer brief brand. So that'll be a part of the long-term focus of Unilateral Decisions. But as always, we appreciate everyone's time. Hopefully we're back in the studio soon in person. But thank you everyone for watching and listening to another episode of Unilateral Decisions.